So this is a one-off conversation and a real treat, because I think for the first time in tennis, we have an in-depth conversation about how the military train and how it's applied to tennis in order to bring maximum power to bear at critical moments under pressure. And it's a treat. So we have Brigadier Darrell Amerson here today, who is a man of many hats because he's a friend, he's an amazing doubles partner to play alongside, he's chairman of Army Tennis and a serving brigadier, whose previous job, in fact current job, is reshaping the Army's training in the light of new technologies in the battlefield. So exactly the right person that we should be speaking to. So Darrell, first of all, apart from saying thanks for your time, what is the importance of tennis in the British Army? Why bother with it in the first place?
Okay, well, first of all, Mark, let me thank you for the opportunity to talk to you, and thank you also for your contribution to Army Tennis over the last 5-6 years or so, because we've really benefited from your wisdom, your advice and guidance. And there's no doubt about it that our players are developing as a result of many of the insights that you've had, and also your commitment and enthusiasm. So thanks for all the help that you've given to Army Tennis. In terms of the value of tennis, let me just talk first of all about the value of sport, because it's absolutely fundamental to soldiering. It's key to our fitness, it's key to our health, it's actually key to having fun and enjoyment. That's really quite important. But what sport also does, and this is particularly important, is that it really sharpens our competitive edge. And I mean that both conceptually, but also physically. So this sense of fighting spirit that one can experience on a rugby pitch, or a football pitch, or indeed on a tennis court, is something that is really beneficial to the way that we prepare our soldiers for key decisions at key moments, for leadership, for teamwork, and of course there are very strong similarities between the experiences on the tennis court, the sports pitch, and what we might be expected to do in terms of training and operations.
Cool. A trick question for you: how do you describe yourself as a tennis player?
That is a good question. Being brutally honest with myself, I would probably say I've underachieved.
Oh,
probably. I would probably say that.
Us.
Exactly. In part through injury, frustrating injuries at the wrong time. And I think as a child growing up, I was very much a jack of all trades. So I played a lot of racket sports, tennis. I played a lot of badminton. I played a lot of squash. Tennis and squash to county level in the UK. And a lot of football actually as well. And cricket. So probably a jack of all trades, and then focused in on tennis. I've been chairman of Army Tennis since 2012. I've been involved in Army Tennis since I joined the Army back in 1990, 28 years ago. But for me, it's I've had some fantastic experiences on the tennis court. Some great matches, some great partnerships, losses,
some great wins.
But some great wins, and one with you, Mark, I recall a couple of years ago against the Royal Air Force. I do remember.
Do the losses the losses hang around in your brain longer than the wins?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I don't think so. No, I think you focus.
With me, they do.
No, I think you focus on the successes and the more enjoyable moments. Yeah.
Lovely. And also, Darrell was kind enough, along with Bill, to be a mentor to me early doors, to get into military doctrine and how that might be applied to tennis. So, and although Big Point Player has moved on a lot, because in the original it was Gladiator, Roman Colosseum, lots of testosterone, which is still there, but we've taken away the testosterone. Can you remind me how we started off with the concepts?
Yeah, and I think in those early discussions we had, Mark, over lots of coffees and probably the odd glass of wine as well, what I was sort of describing, I think, to you was this notion of fighting power that is really central to not just the Army, but actually the armed forces more broadly. And really what we mean by fighting power are its three constituent elements, really. And by that, we refer to the conceptual component. So really, if you like, the cognitive element of preparing and potentially fighting. and you know, I think that's hugely important, a hugely important component that is probably underplayed at times. The second element is the physical component. So from a military perspective, that would be the way we train, our equipment, the way we sustain ourselves, physical preparedness, if you will, of man and platform, or woman and platform. And the third area, so we've got the conceptual, we've got the physical, and the third area is what we refer to as the moral component. So really these are about the values and standards that we apply, because of course, you know, we have to, and rightly so, abide by legal, legal policy, but it's also about ethics and morals. And I think, you know, what we were discussing in the early days was actually the harmony, it's the integration, the harmony of the three that delivers the fighting power. And I think if you think about the harmony of physical aspects of sport, of conceptual, cognitive aspects of sport, and actually moral as well, the way in which you win, the way in which you lose, your respect or otherwise for your partners and your opponents is a really, really powerful combination of ideas.
Okay. Just interesting on that, because when I interviewed the head of mental conditioning at Nick Bollettieri, and he'd been doing it for 10 years, so he's a world expert.
Yeah.
I said to him on one question, can you spot a champion at hello?
Yes.
And he said, well, if we could, we'd make many millions. But
Yes.
there are three aspects of what makes a champion. One was a willingness to always be open and learning all
Yes.
the time.
Yes.
Second one was about leadership, and the third was about being meticulous on your word.
Yeah.
And the leadership thing is what you're describing,
Yeah.
which is how to respect the game and your opponent. And if you look at the Federer and the Djokovic's and the Nadals,
Exactly.
they are always noble in
Exactly
victory and
that.
defeat.
And I think that's a really key point, Mark. And certainly, you know, the values and standards that we have in the army are absolutely underpin everything we do. And it's so important because, unfortunately, you do see occasionally, you know, that the sport not being played in the right. But you're right. If you look at Federer, you look at Djokovic, you look at the respect that they have for the opponents, whether they win or lose. It really is deeply impressive.
And there's a spin on that, which is our spin, may or may not be the truth, is that, and I fall into that category often, is that if you're having to pump yourself up and get excited, that tells your opponent you don't really believe.
Yeah.
You're having to oomph yourself because you don't believe. And the Federers and the Djokovic's and the Nadals never do that until they've actually won.
Exactly.
That's okay.
Could I just pick up on one point you made as well? Because I think it is really important. You spoke about an open mind. And I know some psychologists will refer to this as the sort of growth mindset. And I think this is really important because, again, you know, I think soldiering has a particular image. But the truth is, you know, what we're trying to generate now for very complex situations where we're operating with multiple partners, both military and non-military, to deal with some very complex problems, is that you can't really have a closed mindset. You need to have an open mindset. You need to be able to listen more than, you know, you talk in many instances. You need to listen to other ideas, and you need to learn. So learning is really important, a part of this growth mindset. And that's something that's critical in soldiering. I think it's critical in tennis as well.
Just look at Nadal, Djokovic, Federer, and even Murray, as to how they reinvented their game over the last few years when everybody's counted them out. Federer, you're too old, retire now, while we remember you're great. Nadal, you're injured, retire now, and then they go back and grow and reinvent and come back and win.
Yeah.
Cool. So that's great. So my key question now is that the military have proven for centuries, if not decades, that they consistently turn ordinary human beings into extraordinary human beings at critical moments under pressure in battle. It's proven without doubt. We're one of the best armies in the world. So why do you think it is that you take that proven fighting soldier and put them on a tennis court and they suffer the frailties of under pressure the same as everybody else?
Yeah, it's a great question, actually. And, you know, I think, I mean, first of all, what I would say about the army and soldiering is it's actually a very peculiar profession because it's one of the very few professions where we hope we will never actually have to operate in the way that we train, because nobody wants to go to war, nobody wants to fight. And I think that's self-evident. So actually what we do in the army is spend most of our time training and preparing for particular operations that may never come to pass. So that's quite a unique aspect of the profession. But what it does do is place a real premium on training, both individual training, but also what we call collective training as part of a wider team. And of course you build that team up. So you start with an individual soldier, you build up to section, platoon, company, battalion. You know, you bring in other arms, so armour, aviation, etc. But then you've got to operate the army with the Air Force and the Navy and so on and so forth, and it builds up. So it's the specificity of the problem, I think. So we're training for certain circumstances, and we have something called, mission. We do our sort of core basic training, but we then build on this mission-specific element to it. And I think it is about the specificity of the problem, because you can get benefit, of course, in terms of that physical preparation, conceptual preparation, moral preparation into sport, into tennis. But you've got to apply that in a very, very different context.
Sure.
In terms of,
I'm going to go through the
tennis.
trust method now. So the first T is for tactics.
Okay.
So we, just like the army would have, you wouldn't go blind into battle. You would do intelligence and recce on the enemy.
Yes.
Their courses of action, and
Yeah.
evidence would dictate what you do.
Yeah.
So in tennis, also unusually, we have all the stats of 70% of points being won in 4 shots or less, and
Yeah.
20,
Yeah.
and train those tactics only. And most people, I think, tennis would spend 90% of their time practicing long rallies, backhands and forehands from the baseline, without knowing that only 10% of the points are won there. So 90% of the time, 10% of points. Wouldn't it be nice if you spent 80% of your time on where 80% or 90% of the points are done? So in the military also, you would get tactics absolutely right before you went into battle.
Yeah, and I think what I would say there, Mark, is, there are core skills and drills. There are core skills and drills that we sort of focus on as the bread and butter. It's the foundation. And I guess in tennis, that's the ability to hit a forehand, a backhand. Everyone will have a slightly different take on the stroke, but the technical ability to play the shot. So we have a foundation. Yeah,
because it is key.
Yeah.
Because in the military you train, I know you do, the basics meticulously well.
Yes.
Whereas in tennis we don't train the basics meticulously well. We go straight into serve like Federer.
Sure.
How do we do a 100-mile serve?
Yeah.
How do we do a great forehand?
Exactly.
And the basics
You're
are
absolutely
not
right.
done.
And what the basics, if you get the, in the military, if you get the basics right, it then allows you to build the collective confidence, and it builds also the ability to be adaptable to changing circumstances that you can't predict. And I guess, on a tennis court, you're absolutely right. There's probably more, there's more data available probably in terms of understanding tennis, as you say, whether it's the importance of the serve, the importance of the return, for instance. And that really hones in perhaps where you should be focusing your effort, but you also need sufficient foundation to be able to adapt according to your opponent's particular strengths or weaknesses.
Yeah. Okay, so I just want to touch again on self.
Yes.
Because tactics is one thing,
Yeah.
the ability to execute in training is one thing, but the ability to do it when there's mayhem around you is another.
Yeah.
And that comes down to belief and resilience and the other things that the army teach by rote. I don't think anybody stands in front of a class and go, right, here's the 4 pillars of
Absolutely.
belief, chaps.
Yeah.
It seems to be inculcated in you along the way.
Yeah, and I think it's about giving people opportunities to lead. It's about giving people opportunities actually to fail, but to learn from failure as well. So this point about learning is really critical, and not being frightened of failure. So this is a real focus for us.
That's a massive, because without failure there's no growth.
Exactly, it's the growth mindset.
So you could argue failure is a sign you're on the right path, son.
Absolutely. As long as we're failing and learning from the failure, we're making progress.
Awesome. So I'm going to bring this to a close. I want to thank Darryl so much. I'm sure people have found it fascinating. And that is how what is now Big Point Player started off, with the military doctrine, the guiding hand of Darryl and Bill, and through various testings and feedback we end up with the trust method and Big Point Player helping amateur tennis players around the world to get more big fat W's by their name.